So as you might have been able to tell, it's a little dark. A little dark in here, a little dreary. Whoa. That's because over where I live, we get winter for like a week maybe. And once it's like, winter, the week of winter, we get like yeah, anyway, so I wanted to clear up just a little detail. Um, like, I know the thumbnail of this video says transgenderism, and the title says transgenderism, and the video before this one was transgenderism. And I want to. Oh yeah, so it's still snowing, so it might just cover up. It might just cover up this anyway, but all my hard work for nothing. Anyways, yeah, so transgender. What I mean by transgenderism is not literally everybody who is trans identified as part of a cult and they're like automatically recruited into the cult of trans. I'm saying that what transgenderism is and means to me is anybody who wants to be like trans rights activist. Usually they're the cult leader type things, the cult members and whatnot. That's what I mean. I don't mean like people who just so happen to be trans identified, but they're like, what's going on and why? I don't want to like infringe on women's rights and take gay rights completely ass backwards. I don't want to do that. I want us to celebrate gay rights and women's rights and stuff like that. So like those types of people are not part of transgenderism. So I hope I make myself clear. This video is on information control. Let's just jump right into it. The first point to this one is deception. How do they deceive people with information? Deliberately withholding information is what the trans community and the trans rights activists do is they withhold the fact that without affirmative care model, most kids, teens, and adults will simply grow out of their gender dysphoria. They withhold that watching and waiting is even a possibility. They withhold the fact that many trans-identified people who've undergone surgery still hold suicidal ideation, same as they did pre-op, sometimes even worse afterward. And sometimes, yes, they will acknowledge these points, but they'll bend it to their narrative. They'll just be like, oh, well, that's just a small number, a percentage like that, that's so small. That's still a percentage of people. You still need to care about that in any case. Anyway, so and they belittle the information as well. They do it all the time. They withhold the fact that detransitioners aren't less than 1% of the trans population. They will deny any larger number if it's presented by scientists, despite the fact that they deliberately censor and deny studies that are willing to draw accurate numbers of detransitioners, calling these people who are willing to do these studies as transphobic. So it's just like, can you really imagine that? Like, oh, well, where's your accurate number then? What's your number? How many detransitioners really are there? And then someone's like, hey, I have an idea. Why don't we do a study? We have the equipment. We can do it. Well, let's do a study and like really like actually count the numbers. And then the people who are just complaining say, no, don't you dare fucking say that, you little witch. That's so transphobic that you even said that. And it's just like, it's mind numbing. Like, here's your goalpost. And then you're like, okay, I'll reach it. I reached it. I made this study. And they're like, no, I'm going to extend it over here. And that's what they do. They do it all the fucking time. And it's outrageous. Cult! Cult! Anyway, they withhold the fact that some trans identified people are criminals and abuse the self ID system, which was something I kind of covered in the other video that I made. But when they do acknowledge these criminals, they claim that those criminals are still valid in their gender identity, and they committed the crime because cis scum made them do it, which is exactly what a narcissist would say. Like, I didn't kill this person. You made me feel so bad about myself, and I don't know, you just ran into my knife. Like, no, you decided to do it. That was your will. The next sub point is they distort information to make it more acceptable. They are constantly changing the definition of gender, sexuality, gender expression, and gender dysphoria as well as gender identity disorder to fit the narrative. For instance, trans women are women, therefore distorting what is actually a woman, and genitals don't define sex, therefore genitals don't mean anything besides being a fetish if you're like into a specific set of genitals, you know. Gender dysphoria can look like literally any kind of discomfort at all, and that therefore is proof that, oh, I'm trans. Conversion therapy has been distorted to mean that forcing someone to be gender conforming is a method of conversion, that homosexuals and transsexuals are linked when they absolutely are not. Once trans brains were debunked, these people simply went the pseudoscience route and proclaimed that gender identity is how you feel, womanhood is how you identify as, it's a feeling, gender is a feeling. Yet they don't define what that feeling is without using harmful stereotypes. And often they don't even like define it at all. They'll just say, oh, it's how you feel. And then there is no answer behind, okay, then what is this feeling? They don't answer. I don't get it. But if you were to really dig, they would end up saying, oh, well, girlhood is just being submissive. Girlhood is just liking the color pink. Girlhood is liking Edward Cullen. Girlhood is wanting to be Bella. And they also deny that transgenderism is not at all linked to mental illness. And when I say that, I don't mean that transgender identification is a mental illness, because it isn't. It's the gender dysphoria and the gender identity disorder is what mental illness is. And then there's also mental illnesses that go into the gender dysphoria stuff, but being transgender is not a mental illness in and of itself. Sexuality is about who you are attracted to. Gender is about who you are. I'm like, okay, I guess that makes sense. They'll say that, but then they'll quickly distort what gender and sexuality is when it comes to a trans relationship, for instance. Suddenly, a lesbian is forced to be heterosexual when a transsexual male wants to be in a relationship with her. Lesbians aren't attracted to males, but if male is a gender and he identifies as a lesbian slash woman slash female, then she should technically be attracted to him. And this just reminds me, I mean, the whole thing really reminds me of when I was like, I don't know, 5, and I would be playing with my older brother, and we would be playing with like Legos or Bionicles or whatever have you. If he would like kill me in whatever little game we were playing, I would just make up the rules all of a sudden, be like, no, I didn't just die, I actually dodged it, or oh, I used a magical barrier with my thoughts, you know. And it's like, I didn't actually die. And I did that all because it was just like, no, I still want to keep playing and I don't want to be bested. And that's exactly what these people are doing. Like, oh, well, I am technically a lesbian because I identify as one. The next subpoint is systematically lie to the cult members. And trans rights activists constantly lie about the enemy, that all transphobes want to kill trans-identified people where there is no evidence of this, and they will abuse the numbers of transgender murders to emphasize the idea that they are in danger at all times for being who they really are, when this just isn't the case. They will use that whole thing of, oh, we die all the time, but to further demonize cis people. That's what really further creates this whole thing of us versus them. Like, anybody who isn't transgender is probably gonna either like want to kill me or maybe probably just will. That goes into the whole like violence thing, like, oh, well, your words are violence when you misgender me, or correctly gender me technically. That's being super violent and vicious and you're gonna kill me and blah blah. They've taken that narrative and they've blown it up so much to the point where if anybody disagrees with anything, I guess just death is just right around that consonant and syllable. In addition to this, they also lie about suicide rates and trans-identified persons all the time. It's part of the fear-mongering thing as well. That's what they do with this information. So in order to keep members on edge and recruit new members, this is potent fuel for expediting transition. If you don't transition, or if you don't transition your kid, if you have a trans-identified kid, you or your child will inevitably kill themselves, which simply isn't true. And it's also putting, like, fault on somebody else. Like, I know this is probably a taboo thing to say, but it's just like, when you commit suicide, that's kind of on you. You do have a choice between life or death. You can choose life and deal with your circumstances, as opposed to just killing yourself in the name of a belief system that doesn't even really fully support you. But anyway, the community lies about the trans experience that once you get started on medical intervention, you'll inevitably become happier and free, that your dysphoria will finally lift and you'll feel more comfortable in your skin. People who have had top or bottom surgery, especially the females, less about the males, because it's very reversible when you get gel implants. Like, you can reverse that. People who have had top or bottom surgery will lie to themselves and others about their positive experience being post-op. And the main reason why they lie and say it was great is because they know very well that the surgeries are irreversible, and for that they are forced to either deal with their doubts and fears or completely succumb to it and regret their decisions. Usually they opt to lie for the sake of the community. This adds to the community's confirmation bias. The next point is minimize or discourage access to non-cult sources of information, including subpoint A, internet, TV, radio, books, articles, newspapers, magazines, media. So, Irreversible Damage by Abigail Schreier, which I've done a 12-piece playlist thingy, and you can find that in my playlist tab if you wanted to see it. Abigail endorses it, so please go check it out. Anyway, so her book, and herself included, of course, has been deemed a turfy book and has been heavily discouraged from other members to read, to the point where, for instance, somebody who was featured in the book, Chase Ross, says, quote, "If you want to know more about this book, don't buy it, don't rent it, don't peek at it on the internet, don't do it. Instead, watch Ty," who's another FTM transitioned woman, watch Ty's video, any other trans person talking about how horrible this book is. And that's Chase Ross's direct attempt at discouraging members to seek outsider information and redirect their attention to other good members. And what she also did was incite legal action to other members who were mentioned in the book, which means they seek to censor it on a greater level than simply word of mouth. Which just goes to show, I don't want anybody ever to see this book, and it's always in the name of, I don't want you to get hurt, or it's just like, honey, the truth can hurt really badly, but I'd rather people be exposed to it, get a little hurt, but then live like maybe the rest of their lives a little bit happier because they decided to venture out on territory that might be a minefield, but at least they went and did it. Like, I would rather somebody go through hell and back and say, hey, I survived it. But no, these people are like, don't go through there. You cannot. You will feel super dysphoric and you will commit suicide. I swear you will die if you look at it, basically, is what they're trying to say. The subreddit Gender Critical has been banned for a while now. I believe it's been a year or two. I don't exactly remember when it was banned, but in any case, it is banned. So this means anyone, especially impressionable youth, caught up in the gender identity craze has less of a chance to seek debate, and they will see less of the other side of the trans rights activist agenda. And The Man Who Would Be Queen, published in 2003 by J. Michael Bailey, is labeled as defamatory and a book that is very highly discouraged to read because it's, like, it's basically the work of Satan. Any conservative mouthpiece, such as Ben Shapiro, as well as his sister Abby, no, don't pay attention to those. And then the next subpoint is critical information. Any scientific studies that showcase sexual dimorphism are typically banned or at least misused and misinterpreted. Any psychological analysis on gender dysphoria and transgenderism, including the relationship between parent and child, that don't support the narrative are banned. Lisa Littman and Lisa Marchiano's founding of ROGD, which is Rapid Onset Gender Dysphoria, is labeled as hateful, not real science, pseudoscience, even though their whole basis of transgenderism is based off of pseudoscience, and it's not even really even just science. It's just weird philosophy of mind and playing around with ideas. Also labeled as transphobic, often never being linked to the community, replaced instead by trans biased opinion pieces, as if that's really proof of, oh, see, this is how they're wrong. Like, why don't you allow people to look into it for themselves and come up with their own ideas, thoughts, and beliefs on what they've read, rather than just listening to you constantly spout out about how wrong it is. That's not really freedom of thought now, is it? Anyway, so there was another subreddit called Neo Vagina Disasters, which is now, they moved to, I don't know what other website, but basically they have their own, and I'll link that in the description as well. This was banned for telling the truth about sexual reassignment surgery, or SRS for short, but I like to affectionately call it genital mutilation surgery, because that's what it is, because there is no reassignment, there's no gender or sex involved. It's just because your sex isn't just compounded right into your genitals. That's not how it works. That every surgery performed on a trans-identified male is an experiment and subject to botching. Kenneth Zucker pretty much got canceled for his approach toward gender variant kids, as this was labeled as conversion therapy. And anybody I mention, I'll pretty much leave links below that explain more of who they are. Dr. Ray Blanchard's work on autogynephilia are constantly picked apart and derided, and there's other people out there that have just been completely just censored, and they've lost their jobs because of this. And it's just like, there's all your critical information, gonzo. Next subpoint is former members. Detransitioners are mostly forbidden to talk to. The exceptions would be detransitioners who still seem to support the trans cult ideologies, those who know their place. But even then, those types of people are iffy because they're seen as cis people. The detransitioners, especially the ones who are like, they've completely stepped out of the trans ideology and they're just like, wait, reality is biology. Trans women are men. If they say stuff like that and they realize the truth, then those detransitioners are transphobes, they're TERFs, they were never trans ever, they should change their language, we hate them, get out of our sight, sort of thing. Former allies who weren't trans-identified or anything, but they were just, supporting the trans ideology, are fired from their place of work by trans rights activists and discouraged heavily to be interacted with. And, the TRAs will definitely go out of their way to make sure that you won't get employment from some such certain places. They'll try to track you down as well online so that you won't spread misinformation. And this also happens with people who are trans-identified, but they also believe in biology, and they'll also say the same thing of trans women are men. Some of them are former members too, and those people are very, especially like on the target list of TRAs. Next subpoint D, keep members busy so they don't have time to think and investigate. And the biggest example of this I can think of is when it comes to media in general. They'll be talking about trans-oriented events that are either totally trans positive, which means members celebrate achievements made by TRAs, or trans negative events, which incite members to get angry. So when you have the trans positive thing, everybody's like, oh my God, yes, let's just focus on how good this is. But then when it comes to the trans negative part, they get so caught up in their outrage, and they get caught up in this ego loop where they're like, I don't want to believe you're correct, so I'm going to go out of my way to either A, insult you like mad, I will insult you until you're writhing on the floor crying, or they'll do this thing where they'll talk to other trans people, and then those trans people will just echo back to them in agreement, and basically nothing gets done. All they do is just nod furiously at each other like, yeah, you're right, trans women are women, yes! And it'll just be a circle jerk of, yes! We're right! We're so right! We are so putting these people, these TERFs and these transphobes down! Yes! And that's what they do. That's the only thing that they do, and it's so cringy. Like, oh, could you for once, like, actually look at this trans negative thing and actually look at it with an unbiased view? Because that's, like, the science way to do it. But, you know, science is just here for our biases, am I right? Subpoint is E, control through cell phone with texting calls, internet tracking. I don't know about that one. I don't believe they do that one. So moving on to number 3, compartmentalize information into outsiders versus insider doctrines. Subpoint A, ensure that information is not freely accessible. This one, I, I mean, a lot of it is voluntary. They'll want to voluntarily go for, oh yeah, I'll go for this browser extension that will pretty much censor anybody who participates in wrongthink. And I'm not going to reveal the name of this just in case somebody goes, ooh, I can use this. I can now prevent my eyeballs from seeing transphobic things. Anyway, so this browser extension basically it's like the ways of the internet, where it's like instead of the little police bubble thingy icon on the road, it's a transphobe, banning websites and articles that examine the ideology in a critical lens, like the ones I mentioned before in previous point. Labeling anyone who disagrees with the ideology as TERFs or transphobes, therefore discouraging members to not even think to have a peek at these things and people. If something is labeled as TERF, just about no one looks into them. Members simply block and leave, or sometimes, or usually actually, they'll go to that person who's labeled a TERF and just like completely make fun of them. And they'll also go into like really horrible slurs about like her womanhood as well, or they'll just do the mean girls thing where they're like, oh well, you're not woman enough, so I'm going to call you a man because you have kind of narrow features that are masculine, so I'm going to misgender you on purpose. Ooh, I am so clever. As if that lands in the same way. Like, I'm not going to rant about that. That's a different time. Anyway, so if a member does link to non-cult sources, they will frame it in such a way that when other members might examine the outside material, they will read or watch behind a lens of this source is going to be extremely transphobic / transmisogynistic / conspiracy levels of crazy bonkers insanity and nothing to ever take seriously. In fact, sometimes the members who have linked to such pages will incite other members to harass the website / YouTube video or Tumblr blog or tweet, whatever it is. Therefore, this enhances groupthink as well. Subpoint next one, B, control information at different levels and missions within groups. I guess I don't really think that there's much levels to be had, except for like it really depends on how much money you really have. I can say that when it comes to very new members, uh, people who are, cisgendered allies or they're trans eggs, which are people who could potentially be trans, uh, they are faced with SOGIE, which like, are they proud of this acronym? I wouldn't be proud of it. It's like, soggy toast, which stands for sexual orientation and gender identity / expression. It's just like, no. And then more experienced members, especially the ones who are more rich, the ones who have more influence and have more eyes on them, get to make up new rules and meanings, and they get to decide what's offensive and what isn't. The subpoint C, allow only leadership to decide who needs to know what and when. YouTube influencers, for instance, inform members of definitions, how to act, how to respect others and their pronouns regardless of trans identification, like to allies. Influencers on YouTube or blog posts get to decide what information is allowed and how exactly to interpret it. When is usually at the time something they deem transphobic has spilled out into mainstream media and is therefore a major problem to the community and needs to be misinterpreted by the influencer, or at least to warn others not to look into it right at that time when it, like, you know, and exited the gates of hell. Now it's coming out. Oh God. Next point 4, encourage spying on other members. I find this one really creepy. Like, also just in general, I don't really see why people view other people's, like, follower lists unless they're, like, trying to find other people who are kind of like them so that they can follow more blogs that are like that. But I just don't understand the whole, I'm gonna look into your followers list to make sure that you're participating in right think. Like, that's just creepy. I wouldn't ever want to be in a community or a friend group where they're like, oh, I saw you friended somebody named Susan and they like oranges, whereas we're the Apple Club? How dare you philangle with these orange lovers? It's just like, whoa, okay. I don't like that my interests are being spied upon. But in any case, that's what these people do. Members are encouraged to spy on other members, especially if they like start seeming a little suspicious. If they're following you and it's not mutual, then it's like, that's a little weird. But if there's a mutual following, then it's like, oh my God, you're a heretic. Get out of my sight now. Out with you, witch. Out. Psst, psst. Burn. Once this has been noticed, especially if it's a mutual following, and especially if they're like tweeting back and forth as well. Like, they'll take screenshots of this and report it to other members, and then they gang up on that misbehaving member. If an influencer on YouTube is privy to it, then they'll also post it on a video, and then that'll just incite more circle jerking violence. And that's just really sad and creepy. How could you even sit well with yourself being like, ooh, yeah, I want to bully this person, but I'm anti-bullying? Beyond spying, good members are quick to get prickly at any sign of doubt from the bad members, and in troves they will spread gossip to gather a mob and collectively torment that bad member. They will demand that member to take it all back, to apologize, and then they'll return to love bombing. But if no apologies are made, or any take-backsies, then that person is blocked by the group and subsequent groups. Next subpoint B, report deviant thoughts, feelings, and actions to leadership. Since transgenderism doesn't technically have a specific leader, it has leaders, yes, but they're not like, it's a little vague, but I would define a leader as, at least in the trans community, is somebody with the most money, uh, who has the most say on trans rights in government and law. They're pretty much a leader, whereas there's other smaller leaders who are like really big YouTube influencers. Those are also leaders. Anyway, so members report to the most authoritative figure, which could be those rich people, but it could also be the YouTube influencer, or it could be really anybody within their little group who is like the most like connections to other people. They'll go to that person and they will report to them. Even with influencers, they will be called out if they're doing something wrong, and more obedient influencers will create videos on that drama. Like, for example, the drama currently circulating around Calvin right now. When a member is especially disobedient, the community is encouraged to dogpile on that member and eviscerate them. And subpoint C is ensure that individual behavior is monitored by group. And I honestly didn't really know how to fill this out without like repeating The first point A. Point 5, extensive use of cult-generated information and propaganda, including, subpoint A, newsletters, magazines, journals, audio tapes, videotapes, YouTube videos, movies, other media, and I'm pretty sure no one does videotapes and audio tapes anymore. I feel like that's a little outdated. Anyway, so transgender movies such as Boys Don't Cry, Albert Nobbs, which seems actually a little obscure. I don't ever hear anybody talking about it, but basically that is a trans movie. Hedwig and the Angry Inch is another movie. They like frolic too. I hear more about Hedwig and the Angry Inch than any of them because, men are more important than, lesbian women like in Boys Don't Cry. But whatever. Any case, any and all YouTube influencers, especially the ones that look to educate people, such as like Riley Dennis, for example, and then, Tumblr accounts that also look to educate as well. TRAs have breached many medical and psychological websites to replace old information on gender identity disorder / gender dysphoria and transgenderism, as well as Wikimedia type sites to prevent any wrong thing from slipping through. For example, Wikipedia, WebMD, Psychology Today, other places, even sometimes even news outlets as well. They'll be participating in those types of education a little bit, and some universities do it as well. And then there's been discontinued magazines. One of them, Transgender Magazine, another one, Trans Living, but they don't seem to be continuing. At least it seems like the last time they even published anything was maybe 2018 or beyond. The Transsexual Phenomenon, written by Harry Benjamin. I Am Jazz by Jessica Herthel. Judith Butler's Gender Trouble, written or published in 1990, is a really big one that people look into. Eve Sedgwick, I think that's how you pronounce her name. She wrote Epistemology of the Closet, published in 1991. John Colapinto? I don't know if I pronounced that right. He wrote As Nature Made Him, published in 2006, which that book was on the Dr. Money, David Reimer case. And then Facebook and Reddit and a lot of social media websites do a lot of censoring. Facebook will delete certain groups that they just deem as hateful, even though they're probably not. And Reddit will do the same thing, like with gender critical and, vagina disasters, etc., etc. Even Detrans, they thought that was worthy of censoring, but luckily it's still up. Subpoint B, misquoting statements or using them out of context from non-cult sources. This one is really one of their favorite things to do. Any scientific study that focuses on sexual dimorphism, they hone in on and bend the truth. Even better when the study isn't thoroughly researched and didn't follow the scientific method well at all or at all whatsoever. Just to prove that transgenderism is real and not a choice. One example that I have is Ty Turner's video on irreversible damage. She just made a video complaining about it and just saying, basically for 19 minutes or whatever, she's saying this book is transphobic. She was bending the truth completely and misquoting everything. When talking about chapter 3, the influencers, she claims that Abigail misgendered everyone. If you actually read the book, you'd find that she does say he, him about Chase Ross. She does say he, him to many of the other FTMs, and then she'll say she toward the trans-identified males, and so she is respecting that. The only time where she was saying she was when there was a person who's non-binary identified. And of course she's going to be like, I don't really understand what non-binary is, so I'm just going to call she. And I don't know, I don't think you should fault somebody for not really understanding what non-binary is, because non-binary is a little weird to pin down and to understand properly what it even is. So I think you should give her a little bit of slack, at least on that one. When it came to Ty talking about Abigail describing some of these young women's behavior and uh, and whatnot, and even what they look like. Tyler, I guess. Sebastian. Her name's Sebastian. She'll be insinuating that Abigail was being really creepy, like, predator kind of creepy. And it's just like, no, if you actually read what you were like looking at, you would understand that that's not what she's trying to do. And in fact, when she was talking about Sebastian's lip rings, which is one thing she was talking about, being like, "Ooh, that's so creepy and unsettling." It was like she was saying your piercings were fucking cool, but Sebastian took it as, "Ooh, you're like looking at my lips. That's so creepy." Like no, deep breath, deep breath. You're okay. You're not gonna die. Your whole life is not going to just be sucked out of you from a black hole just because she liked your lip piercings. It's okay. You're fine. You're fine. Anyway, moving on. When quoting Lisa Littman's study, TRAs will frame it as an anti-transparents were like affiliated with the entire thing, and those were the only people who were even being interviewed. But the fact of the matter really is, if you actually read the study, is that a lot of them were like, I was totally for trans rights, and that was like the majority of the people who were in the study at all, but they refused to see that, and so they just misquoted it, and they put everything out of context just to support this narrative that, oh, it's just completely transphobic and all the parents were biased and blah blah blah. Like, no. Deep breaths. Deep breaths. You're not going to die. You're fine. Last point is 6, unethical use of confession. Transgenderism, like, yes, it is a belief system, and that therefore kind of makes it like a spiritual / religious sort of cult sort of thing. But when it comes to confession, it's not really that big of a factor. There is sin in that you might say things like I've been saying before, trans women are men, like that would be a sin. But confession really isn't super there. But what I have dug up about confession, so our subpoint, the first one is information about sins used to disrupt and or dissolve identity boundaries. I know I'm kind of repeating myself with, bringing up irreversible damage again, and the discourse between Sebastian and Chase. They were talking about it, and there's quite a bit to unpack, but I wanted to use this example because I think it's a pretty good one. So when I was watching their videos talking about the book, I pieced together that I believe that Sebastian's assumptions around Chase's involvement in the book were right. I think she was very right to think that, I don't know about purposefully, but you were and you are endangering the community. And I agree with that. I think that's what Chase was doing. And I claim that this is true because I know that Chase Ross has a history, whether small or large, I don't specifically know, I don't pay attention to her that much, of manipulation and lying. And she did zero damage control after the book was published. In fact, she kept it completely to herself, hoping it would all blow over. And that just seems a little guilty to me. Like, if you really wanted to get out of drama and controversy, I think you should say it right away. But she didn't. Anyway, in any case, having called Chase out so publicly and recalling details of Chase basically running away from Sebastian and basically like ghosting her, Chase is clearly highly vulnerable to the wrath of the community because Sebastian posted her video first. And so, the wrath of the community came to her, which forced a confession out of Chase. Public humiliation is a really good method to break down identity boundaries, especially to those who want to remain in the community, which Chase desperately wants to be in. This is a method to heal and restore faith because Sebastian didn't want to accuse Chase of this. She wanted to believe that Chase is better than this. And even though Chase is a manipulative person, I believe this whole ordeal reinforced their ideological beliefs and caused more tension in the community at large than it did in any actual healing. Because it shows there is no privacy, any and every sin you commit will be subjected to complete public scrutiny. Subpoint B, withholding forgiveness or absolution. You aren't forgiven until you apologize for all the wrong think you've been publicly displaying. As a rule, the sinner will be met with a tsunami of insults rather than forgiveness or correction of behaviors. Jen Smith, which is someone I will have linked down in the description. This person is a trans-identified male who is not part of the trans community and doesn't subscribe to the ideology. He has voiced his opinions on biological reality, and this was a massive sin, and the reaction was hurtling insult after insult at him until he fixed his own thoughts. Only when he succumbed did they forgive him. Of course, when he started to sin again, the insults came, roaring back. This also happens similarly to Miranda Yardley, which is the same case with Jen Smith. Buck Angel is another one. All three of them are proponents of biological reality. And the last subpoint is C, manipulation of memory, possible false memories. Many ex-members, detransitioners, are told we can't blame the trans community for our transition, which is a way to gaslight us into believing it was our fault. We did this to our bodies. This is a way to create a false memory in us, and it works, especially if the detransitioner is still seeking acceptance and forgiveness and who wants to remain an ally. And what I mean by this is that you're not supposed to blame the trans community for your mistake. That right there is saying it's your fault. You did it. And so that's planting this false memory of, oh, I guess it was all my fault. Maybe they're right, I suppose. So current members get gaslit, and that any disobedient thoughts, like doubting your trans identification, they will use your past as a means to reinforce your trans identification, largely by way of language manipulation, meaning of words, changing their meanings. So, I hope I explained that all. Next video is going to be on thought control, and then the next one after that is going to be emotional control. So that video will be out sooner than this one is. But yeah, anyway, I can't feel my toes. I'm getting out of here. Goodbye.